Good morning. We've gotten a few messages last night about what is finishing an edge with elastic, what is self-binding or binding with mesh, and also what's a bagged edge. So we're making a short video for all the fun different Facebook groups we're involved with. You know, more info is always good. So I've just got a really simple leotard top with mesh. Is going to go into the neck in the front and the back. And for this one, I'm binding it with a thin elastic. You can use 1/4 inch elastic too. And what I've done is first on the inside, I've zigzagged and I've stretched it too, because if you stretch it, you're less likely to have the stitches pop. I've zigzagged an 1/8 inch nude elastic into the neck edge, and then I'm going to roll it over and re-zigzag it from the top. And the reason why I picked nude for this is sometimes if you match the color of the elastic to the mesh, sometimes it shows anymore. And I don't know if it'll show on the camera, but from a distance, having this bold white edge would be more noticeable than a nude edge, but you can do whichever. So all I'm going to do now, and the neck of my mesh is already pretty fitted to their body, so I've stretched this 1/8 inch elastic just a little bit as I sewed it. And now I'm going to start in the back, and I'm going to work on the inside, and I'm going to roll my edge. Let me find a good spot to start. I'm going to roll my edge to the inside, and just with a tiny little zigzag, I'm gonna catch the elastic down to the mesh. And again, I'm gonna stretch it a little bit, because the more stretch that I'm giving it now, the less likely it is for the stitches to break. And you can also use a cover stitch machine to do this. And we'll show you that here in just a few minutes. So yeah, so you just continue around, and then you can mount this to the body of your leotard. Okay, so I'm going to show kind of the idea behind bagging and opening. Bagging is where you combine two pieces of fabric, stitch around them, and then turn them right sides back out, just like making a pillow. So here's the same mesh that we did on our elastic edge. I am going to serge together the neck hole, and then these two edge pieces are the arm opening in my mesh, and then I'm going to flip it inside out and then close up the center back. So let's do that together. And my mesh is I made just a little bit smaller than it needs to be at the neck, since we're not putting an elastic in there. So I'm going to lay my front to my front, line up my backs, mesh, nice and shifty. And sometimes with the mesh, you really got to make sure that you've got the grain lined up really well, or it'll look like wood grain or moire. Mine is kind of close. I could have lined it up a little bit better. So I'm going to just hook my neck, my front together. And I'm going to use the pins connected to my hands to sew this. And then we'll do the same for the armholes before we turn it right side out. And the mesh doesn't really have a right or a wrong side. Line up my back. So that's the neck. So we're bagging the neck, and now we're going to bag the armholes and then flip it inside out. So there's one armhole. Here's the other armhole. Now we're just going to reach in through the shoulder. So this doesn't have a shoulder seam, but you can make it with a shoulder seam if you prefer that. So I'm going to take my 2 layers and give them a shake here. You just kind of keep working it around. So now we have the neck and the armholes are finished off with serging, which you can stitch flat if you want, but once this is put on the body, the tension of the costume is gonna make this all lay really nice, so you don't necessarily need a top stitch on there. Then, now we've got the back unfinished, we could put the backs together, put all 4 backs together like that, or if you want to not have any serging exposed on the inside, I'm going to take my backs. Here, let me show this better. Both ways work. You can just put the two sets of backs together and serge them all at once, or if you want, you can open it up and hide all the serging on the inside. So that's what I'm going to do. I've opened my back up. So I'm going to bag the back seam too. And then you just want to see which way the serging wants to lie and make them both match. Otherwise you have kind of a goofy intersection at the back. Now when we look at this again, now we have a really beautiful back and a nice bagged neck and bagged armholes, and that is what is going to get sewn into our garment. Again, this, you can put this if you don't want this double layer of serging in here. If that concerns you, then just put the 2 backs together and serge down the middle, but then it doesn't look as nice at the neck, so you kind of decide what it is you want. And that's a bagged mesh, but you can bag all sorts of edges. Okay, so now we've looked at elastic edge and bagging an edge, and now I'm going to show you how to make a self-bound edge with mesh. So we're going to bind our mesh edge with mesh, and I want my binding to end up about 1/4 inch or 3/8. So to get the width of my binding, I use 3/8 that shows to the audience, 3/8 that's hidden, and then 1/4 and 1/4 for my serging seam allowance. And I want to make the hole in my binding, or well, I actually want to make my binding a loop that's just a little bit smaller than the neck hole. So I'm going to fold my neck in half, and I'm just going to do this real scientifically, and I'm not really stretching it. I'm going to just walk my binding along the neck edge until I see, okay, I'm going to stop about right there. I'm not going to go all the way to the front because I want to have to stretch it a little bit. And then I'm going to just serge that amount into a tube first. So I'm just connecting my 2 short edges. And I probably need scissors. Look at that. Rachel's magic. So these, I do want to tidy up these little gross serger worms here. I wonder whose scissors they are. Who's Pat?
It says Pat.
I know. Now, I'm going to fold the serged edge of my binding to the inside, and I'm also going to find the center front, because I'm going to just kind of lay this down all at once. So I'm going to wrestle with this till I find the front. Now that I've found the front, and I know my front here, I can just pin that together. And then I've got seams to match in the back. So I'm going to actually just see if I can do this sans pins and get around here. But I don't want to start and stop exactly in the front, so I'm going to go back just a little ways. So now, remember, my binding is a little bit smaller than my neck hole. So as I'm going around, I am going to stretch it just the tiniest bit. And then when I'm getting close to the back, I'm going to make sure that my the center back of my binding actually matches up to the center back of my top. So there I've got my center backs. I can already start holding my center backs together. And then I can see exactly how much stretch I've got to give to the binding. So I'm just getting all 3 of those lined up. And if they don't want to stay lined up in your serger, it might be that you need to mess with the pressure on your serger's presser foot. Sometimes when stuff is sliding, it means that there's either too much or not enough pressure on the serger foot. So I've got all 3 edges lined up again. And now we're almost to the back, so now I can just line up my center back. And actually, so with all those serging seams there, I'm going to offset it just a smidge. I think it'll lay better than it being just a huge, gigantic lump. Now I can see how much, so now I've got my binding and the other half of my neck, I can see how much stretch I've got to give it. And I'm just going to continue around. just keep lining stuff up. This is so narrow, pinning this would be difficult, I think, but some people are much better with pins. So now if we look at this one, oh, it's a thing of beauty. You'll see that there's this lovely, nice little self-bound edge here, and once the tension is on it, it should lie in towards the neck. And I'm going to push the serging out into the garment instead of behind the binding, because otherwise it's just going to get super duper thick, and we don't want it to be super duper thick. So that's a self-binding. Okay, so now that we've serged on our binding, our self-binding that is cut a little bit smaller than the neck hole, now I'm going to just control the serging with a tiny little zigzag, and I'm going to anchor the serging down so that it lays nice forever and for always. And you can also cover stitch this if you've got a cover stitch machine. I've got a little serger tail to get rid of. And again, I like to stretch this just a little bit to make sure that my zigzag will never, ever, ever, ever pop. We've got our top where we use 2 layers of mesh and bagged the edge using the serger. So this is a double layer, and we've got the neck and the armholes serged. And if you were going to complete this, you would first want to manage and finish up the lycra part of this, whether you're using a little bit of binding or elastic in the armhole, and then connect your mesh top. But so this is the bagged top where we serged it. Then the next one I've got is the self-bound top. We'll put that one on and look at that one. And they all accomplish a similar thing. It just depends on what you want to do. So here's the self-bound top, where we used a piece of mesh that was 3/4 plus a 1/2 inch, so 1 1/4 inches of mesh, and we created a lycra, well, a mesh tube, and we stitched the short edges of our tube together first, stretched it on and serged it, and then to control the serging we did just a tiny little zigzag around the edge to hold that down. So that's mesh binding, and you can use that on the neck, on the armhole, even on the legs if you want to. And then let's look at the last one, where we just used a piece of elastic to finish the edge. Here comes the last one. This girl's been dressed and undressed a lot lately. So here I used an 1/8 inch elastic, and I stretched it a little bit onto the inside of the mesh, and then we rolled the edge over. And I chose to do this with nude elastic because in a theater, often the way the light works is sometimes you'll finish it with a color that matches, so you can see how much more the white actually shows up than the nude. So whether this was nude, black, red, green, or purple, if you finish this with nude, it usually will blend in to their body better or not highlight the edge. Unless you want to highlight the edge, then you should highlight the edge. There you go, 3 ways to finish stuff off. Thank you.